Hello, everybody. Welcome to our lecture today on free will and determinism. This is our first sort of push into a specific topic on in metaphysics in our third section here. And here we go. So the free will debate takes place in the middle of a larger theory in the philosophy of metaphysics, the metaphysics of action. So act theory or theory of action is a part of metaphysics that studies, what it is to make an action, to act in a certain way, what's going on when we act, what is it to be responsible for an act. So it's like it combines both metaphysics and morality. Like, what is it for a person to act immorally or irresponsibly in certain ways? What is it for a person to be held responsible for an action, etc. So first, it's worth just thinking a little bit about what an action is. So actions in general are a kind of event, right? So events are periods of time over which something occurs, something happens, and actions are a kind of event, right? They're a kind of event involving an agent and an agent's doing some sort of thing that an agent does, right? So when we have these actions, we have an event type in which there is an agent who is the loci of the action, the sort of center of the action. So in the event, there's an agent, and the agent does something where the doing is the thing that the agent can do, right? So events can be just like happenings of a certain sort, but specific kinds of events that involve individuals, like you or me, or a dog or a cat, maybe even. They count as agents, and then there are things that they can do. And an action occurs when an agent does something. Now, sometimes we make decisions. Basically, I mean, so sometimes when we're thinking about the different kinds of actions that there are, sometimes we do things that are sort of on accident, right, or unintentionally. Things happen, and we end up doing something that we didn't mean to do. Though often we do things after thinking about them hopefully like thoroughly, and actually, act in a way that is based on a decision that we made to act. So generally, agents take actions after deciding to act in certain ways. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes accidents happen, or you act in ways that you weren't really thinking about. That happens, when people are like moving their hands when they talk. Sometimes they don't think about the fact that they're acting in certain ways, or if you're just not paying attention in certain ways, you might be acting but not really in control. Now we tend, and this is important because I think, especially with the free will debate, and we'll come back to this more later, we tend to hold people responsible for their actions. That is, something like moral responsibility is really tightly knit in with respect to what we know of and think about when it comes to action. We hold people responsible for their actions, and we hold people more responsible if we know that they made a decision to act in the way that they did, right? So if someone thought out how they were going to act in a certain way and then they act that way, well, whether or not it goes well or poorly, we hold them more responsible, right? So if someone, say, premeditates a murder, they think about it beforehand, then they are in some, they're morally more reprehensible. They're held more responsible than someone that gets so angry in the moment that they, lash out and hit someone and the person dies, something like that. Similarly, in the good case, right, if you meticulously plan out and do all this action in like studying, and then you do really well on a test, well, the good grade is given to you on the basis of the fact that you did a good job. Or if you do all your homework in worrying about like an investment or something, and then the investment comes through, or you do all of the practice that you need to do on the practice squad in order to become the best possible person playing whatever sport you play. Doing all of that thinking ahead of time about what it is that you're going to do and what you need to do in order to get yourself into a place to do that that thing, makes you more responsible for your decision to act in the moment, and we praise you for it. So now let's think about free will and determinism. So it sure feels like we're free to act in ways that we want to, right? So here's an argument that's basically claims that we perform free actions, right? So sometimes you act after you decide to do something. So you think about what you want to do, you decide to do it, and then you go for it. And it seems like if a person performs an action after they decide on performing it, then the action that they're performing is a free action. So if both of those premises are true, then it seems like some of the actions that people perform are free. Now, this argument has a problem, but at the very least, the first premise totally seems true, right? It's really hard to say. I mean, it just doesn't seem clear, like at all, that you can somehow ignore the fact that you perform actions after deciding to perform them. You make decisions, I make decisions. Not 100% sure that my dog makes decisions. He might just be like going wild on the inside, not really thinking about what he's doing. But for the most part, we make decisions and we act. So premise one here seems pretty good. Premise two, though, is a little bit of a stinker. It's a little bit problematic. Why would I say that? Well, just because one performs an action after deciding to perform it, does that really make the action free? I mean, like, imagine you decide to give someone your wallet because they're pointing a gun at you and telling you to give them your wallet, right? I mean, they have prompted you to make a decision. You could decide to not hand over the wallet, but I mean, in this context, they're making you do it in a sense, right? They're making you decide, given that you really want to live, to hand it over. So of course you're not freely handing over your wallet in this case, even though you're deciding to hand over your wallet. So what gives here? I mean, it seems like this premise is sort of off. So it's not entirely clear that this argument actually goes through. Right? It's not entirely clear that really just because you decide to perform actions that those actions are free actions. And this is where things start to go wrong, right? The free will debate just gets worse and worse from here. All right, so think about this. When it comes to making actions, when it comes to taking an action, what is it that you do? Like, how is it that you act, right? Well, generally, agents decide to act on the basis of the things that they want, right? They think about what they want. So like, in the case in which someone points a gun at you and says, give me your wallet, you realize like, oh, I want to continue living more than I want to have this wallet. And so I'll hand it over, right? So generally you decide to do things on the basis of the desires that you have, the things that you want, even, not frivolous things like your desire to continue living, your desire to eat food and drink water, that the drives that you have that motivate you. Those are your desires, right? And so usually when we think about, in the philosophy of action, when we think about the kinds of things that drive people to act, we can divvy them up into different categories and sort of break down how actions occur. And this is sort of a real basic picture of how actions, seem to occur to everybody. There's people that quibble with the specifics here, but here's a basic idea. It seems like we act on the basis of intentions. That is, when we make an intention, then we've made some sort of decision to act in a certain way. And an intention is kind of like a belief plus a desire. So what is an intention? Well, if I, intend to go eat lunch, then, well, what exactly is going on there? Well, I usually, in that case, I have a desire for food, right, around lunchtime. And I have a belief that, there's food in the refrigerator. And my belief also includes the belief that
If I go to the refrigerator, then I'll be able to get out food, make some food, and satisfy my desire. So those beliefs and that desire together, all combined, forms the intention to go to the refrigerator to get a sandwich, to make a sandwich. Now, with that intention to go to the refrigerator, this is sort of like, beliefs and desires. Those are psychological states that are in my mind. And intention is kind of like a complex psychological state that's aimed at action, but it's not yet action. It's just the intention to act, right? It's something that I can, it's kind of got a feeling to it. It's like, oh, I'm going to go do this thing, but I haven't done it yet. It's whatever, whenever we talk about trying to do things, it's that feeling that's going on when you're trying to do something. Whether or not you're going to succeed, you've got this intention to do it. You're going to try to do it. All right. Well, now with the intention, you also need something like an ability, right? So the ability to do something. So with the intention to make a sandwich, or for myself for lunch, I also need to have the ability, right? I need to know, or I need to have the ability to walk over to the refrigerator. I need the refrigerator door to open. I need to be able to get out pieces of bread and um, run the mayo and mustard on the bread, etc. So I come to recognize, I don't even have to necessarily recognize that I have the ability, but with my intention and the ability to do these things, I can make a decision to go make a sandwich. Now, once I've made a decision, I get up and go make a sandwich. But what else do I need? Well, I need the world to cooperate in some way, right? Or in every way, right? There's a lot of different ways things could go wrong, right? Like while I'm going going down the stairs to make a sandwich, I could trip and fall, and then that would, stop me from being able to make a sandwich. If on my way to the kitchen, an asteroid hits my kitchen, then it destroys all the stuff that I have. And even though I still have the intention and maybe the decision to make a sandwich, the world is not cooperating, and so I was unable to make a sandwich in that case. Finally, though, if the world does cooperate, I am able to get from where I am to the kitchen, open the refrigerator, pull out all the stuff, and make a sandwich. So now we've got an action. Now, remember, all of that is just to sort of lay out how we get to an action. And all of that basically starts with our beliefs and desires. So generally, when we decide to do things, it's the basis for the things that we do. The sort of starting point are the desires that we have. Now, question: it seems like we choose to do things on the basis of our desires, but are our desires chosen? Do you have control over what you desire? It seems like most, if not all, of your desires are at bottom, in some sense, unchosen by you. So it's an interesting question how you could possibly be free. I mean, um, there are certainly some kinds of things that we desire that we can choose to stop desiring or continue desiring. But for the most part, many of our base desires, our desire for food, for shelter, for water, for comfort, these things are not our choice. These are things that are biologically built into us. These are things that come, prepackaged as a part of us. So we don't even have really, if in the end all action traces back to desire, and we can't control our base desires, and our base desires are unchosen, then in what interesting sense are we free? So here's the desire argument, right? Here's an argument that sort of we can formulate from this way of thinking to the conclusion that in the end, actually, we're not really free. So premise one: what you choose to do is always determined by your desires. Premise two: you can't control your desires. Premise three: so what you choose to do is always determined by something that you can't control. Four: if what you choose to do is always determined by something you can't control, then you never act freely. So, conclusion, you never act freely. Now, this argument is pretty strong, but it's an interesting question. What if you think in the end, look, I see the argument, but it just doesn't strike me as completely plausible. I think it's got to be wrong somewhere. Well, the argument itself is what's called a valid argument. So you need to pick a premise to deny. So maybe you try to deny premise two, and you say, oh, actually, I can control my desires. Sometimes maybe before COVID, I really wanted to go to a concert. I wanted to go see, um, who's a big deal these days. I don't know, Travis Scott. I wanted to go see Travis Scott eat a hamburger on stage because that's a thing that he would do for some reason, right? But after COVID happens, I come to realize, actually, oh no. It's a little bit dangerous to go to a concert, and so I could change my desire, and I decide, no, I'm not gonna go to that, so I can control my desire to go see this concert. Well, is it really plausible that you can control your desires? I mean, yes, you do have control over your desires, but in the context of the case I just gave you, right? How did you control your desires? Well, you changed one of your desires on the basis of some other desire that you had, right? So in this case, you have a desire to do something, and then you come from a desire for safety to change your mind about whether or not you want to do that thing. So you do have some control of your desires, but ultimately it seems like your desires are what control your desires, right? So if you change your mind about what it is that you want to do, you change your mind on the basis of some other desires that seem to take precedence, at least in your mind, um, in that case. So we can change the desire argument up a little bit, right? And put in premise two here. You can't control all of your desires, but we can secure this by thinking about how ultimately, in the end, your base desires, the core desires of your being, are things that you don't have control over. And so, so what you choose to do is ultimately determined by something you can't completely control. That is, the you can't completely control all of your desires, and you can't control the fundamental desires. I mean, maybe you can work on them. You can, like, if you say you have, I don't know, if you're addicted to a drug, it becomes kind of like a base desire of yours, right? You become addicted to this drug, and you have no control over your desire. It's just driving you, out of control. But you can sort of come to have control over it, right? By going to rehab, by either being put there by someone, or putting yourself there. And an interesting question in this case is it's this question of what's called the weakness of the will. So especially in cases like addiction, or in cases in which you know better, right? Suppose your friend is having a party, and you know it's going to be really fun, but you ought to stay home. You also ought to stay home and study for your test the next day. And, like, you know you're supposed to study for your test. You've got to study for your test. Like, it's the best thing that you should do. But that party just sounds so much fun. And in that case, your will, it's weakness of the will. You know the thing that's right to do, the thing's best for you to do, but you still end up going to the party because you have a weak will. Well, in this kind of case, right, your desire in one case is stronger than your desire in another case, and it seems like your desire to do the right thing, or to do the best thing for you in this case, loses out. So, um, yeah, so I mean, ultimately, I think this argument still goes through. It's still sort of a safe argument. Even though you have the ability to, in some cases, change what it is that you desire. You still, if you have no control over your base desires, the desires that are at the core of your being, your desires for food, water, shelter, etc. In the end, if all of your actions are determined by your desires, then it seems like, because you don't have control over those base desires, you never act freely. So yeah, here we go. Even if you can control some of your desires, you certainly can't control your base desires. You can always, I mean, yeah, you can always try and decide to act at random or decide to act at random. But then also, truly, you just haven't chosen freely to do something, right? If you're just kind of blah, like running around, waving your arms, acting randomly, right? You're not acting on the basis of a free choice. You're not choosing to act in that way. Acting randomly is not a way of acting freely, right? Maybe you can try to choose to act randomly, which is an interesting idea. But in that case, if you just are acting randomly, you're not making a free choice, right? You're not choosing to act in the way that you do end up acting. All right, so this is the first argument against the idea that we actually act freely. It's the desire argument. It just goes from the idea of how it is that our actions are generally motivated to the idea that in the end, because we don't have control over how our actions are motivated, we don't act freely. The next argument, though, against the possibility of free will is a little bit more strong, I think, and a little bit maybe more intuitive. And this is the argument from determinism. The argument from determinism says we don't have free will because everything is determined. So the basic idea here is something like this. It seems like every event in the history of all events, as far as we can tell, I mean, even the Big Bang, has to have had some kind of cause. Every event has had a cause. That is, there's no events have just kind of popped randomly into existence. Nothing has ever just sort of happened by completely by chance. Like just there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there was something. That is, everything that's happening now, it seems like, is fully determined causally by something that's happened before. So, some billiard balls bouncing around a table, right? They end up in a configuration. You can explain the ending configuration after they're done bouncing around on the basis of how they bounced around before, right? You get one of those like, you video it and you watch like how each of the balls ran into each other, and that explains how everything, each time a ball hit another ball or hit the wall, that explains how the balls came to sit on the table in the way that they're currently sitting. Nothing happens completely by random chance. Now, this basic idea, you might know about a little bit about physics, and you might say something like, "Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I've heard about this thing called quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics says that everything does kind of happen by chance. It doesn't, not everything is actually determined." And in a way that's right, but also in a way that's incorrect. Quantum mechanics says that at the bottom of everything, as far as we can tell, it's not the case that everything is deterministic. That is, it's not the case that everything happens like in a way that is completely predictable, like one ball bouncing into another. But at the quantum level, it seems like everything is indeterministic, but it's not random. What it is it's indeterministic, and then we get something like a statistical model. Everything is sort of statistical at the bottom. There's a chanciness, but the chanciness is not without end. It's not that like there's a chance that like that anything could happen. It's that there's a chance between something being over here and something being over there, and the chance is like 60-40, and the chanciness is perfectly reliable in a way, in a sense, right? It's not the case that it's like flipping a coin, it's 50-50 gonna land heads or tails. And the ultimate, it's you've only got two options here. It's either going to be heads or tails. It's not like it could also land noses, something like that. That would be totally random. That doesn't even make sense, right? Quantum mechanics is indeterministic, but not ultimately random. So determinism, it doesn't in the end get affected too much by quantum mechanics, though it does make things more complicated. And if you're interested in this kind of debate, the literature gets into the issues with quantum mechanics as things go. But we're not going to talk about it here because it makes things too much more complicated. All right, so what's determinism, like hard determinism as a theory? Hard determinism as a theory in the philosophy of action and free will debate is the idea that the past states of the universe plus the strictly true laws of nature determine the future physical states of the universe. So here's the idea. There are specific laws of nature. Like, we used to think that it was Newton's law of nature. Now we think maybe something approximating Einstein's general theories of relativity and gravity and light. That those are the laws of nature. Now, each of those theories, those are scientists' theories. We're not perfect as humans. So all of our theories are approximating how the laws of nature actually work and what they are. But here we can strictly say, like, let's just talk about the ones that are really true, the real true laws of nature. Hard determinism is the idea that those laws of nature govern how everything works. It governs how all physical particles are going to move through space and time with relation to one another, right? And taking those laws plus the past states of the universe, right? So as far as we know, there was a Big Bang that happened a long, long time ago. I think 13.6 billion years, can't remember, something like that. And then from that point, following the laws of nature, all of this stuff happened, right? There was a big expansion of the universe, and then we thought that it was slowing down, but it turns out it's actually speeding up, and who knows what's going on out there. But the basic idea here, hard determinism, states the past states of the universe plus the strictly true laws of nature determine the future physical states of the universe. So how everything is going to continue to play out, how the billiard balls are going to crash into each other for the rest of time is sort of determined already on the basis of how the laws currently, actually are, and how things looked, yesterday. So here's the argument against free will from determinism. The thought is this: determinism is true. That's what science seems to tell us in some way. It seems like, yeah, okay, physical laws determine what's going on. Determinism is true. Now, if determinism is true, then you are never able to do otherwise. If you are never able to do otherwise, then none of your actions are free. So none of your actions are free. Now, this is a strong argument. I mean, basically, the idea is given determinism, given that the laws of nature strictly govern all physical activity, the thought is that, given determinism, then it's not possible for you to do anything other than what you are going to do, right? Or in the past, like thinking into the past, like it seemed like you were able to choose what you wanted to do, but it turns out, according to determinism, given the strict laws of nature, that all of the particles were just moving in the right such a sort of way, so that you were going to end up doing exactly what you were going to end up doing anyway, and that somehow brought you all the way up to this moment, and it was determined from the beginning of time that the particles were all going to move this way anyway, and just the right way to get you up to right now, and so you couldn't have done otherwise. And given that you couldn't have done otherwise, that means that none of the actions that you ever took were ever free. So none of your actions were free, are free, will be free in the future. Determinism, on the basis of determinism being true, it looks like free will is out. All right, so now here's another argument against determinism, against free will. And maybe you think, okay, I see this argument. It seems like a strong argument, but I believe that I have free will. Like I just can't seem to drop that. I buy that I have free will, so I can't buy this argument. It seems wrong. Well, once again, this argument is a valid argument, and that means that if all the premises are true, then the conclusion follows and must be true. So we can't just deny the conclusion without picking one of the premises to deny as well. So we got to figure out which of the premises is false if we're going, which our premise we're going to argue against if we're going to deny the conclusion. So which premise should we give up? Well, maybe we can give up premise one. Determinism is true. Let's reject determinism and say, no, it's not the case that everything is determined. In fact, everything is not determined. um, everything is random. Let's say everything happens, completely randomly, and there's nothing is ever actually determined. Now, that's just not how things seem, right? I mean, it seems like when a bunch of billiard balls hit one another, they go in a pretty commonly determined pattern. But maybe if that's wrong, then stuff, maybe random stuff can happen, and it just hasn't seemed that random to us so far. Well, there's a problem there. If we reject determinism, the determinism is true, and end up with the result that everything in the universe happens randomly, that doesn't actually help us, right? Because earlier, like what I was saying, if you just try to act randomly, then you're not freely choosing how you're acting. You're just randomly acting, right? The actions are just coming out of you random, with no arbitrarily. There's no reason behind them. There's no thinking behind them. There's no choosing behind them. So in the end, if determinism is false and none of your actions are actually freely determined by you, I mean, yeah, if determinism's, it's not the case that determinism's true. So, not the case that all of your actions are predetermined, but instead all of your actions are just random. Well, that doesn't make them freely chosen. I mean, even if they are in some ways chosen, they're just randomly chosen. Well, then it doesn't seem like you have control. You don't have free choice to choose what it is that you're going to do. There's just some randomness that's going on in the universe that's causing you to choose what it is you're going to do. Or there's some randomness that's causing you to act in certain ways. And that doesn't help us because it doesn't make our actions free. Our actions being free means that we choose freely what to do on the basis of like reasons that we want, things that we want to do. So this seems like a problem. All right, well, if we can't reject premise one, maybe, just maybe, we can reject premise two. So premise two says, if determinism is true, then you're never able to do otherwise. And maybe we can come up with a way of thinking that rejects how being, that being able to do otherwise is somehow incompatible with determinism. Here's the idea. Maybe it's possible for me to do otherwise, even though determinism is true. So everything is determined from the beginning of time, right? We've got the past states of the universe plus the laws of nature determining every action. But that doesn't mean that, right now, I'm not able to do other than what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to act one way, but I could have acted another way. So it seems like I still could have acted otherwise. Now, in order to understand this, we've got to take a little side tour through some logic. Now, remember, we're looking at this argument and we're trying to now argue against premise two. What is premise two? Premise two says, if determinism is true, then you are never able to do otherwise. That is a conditional statement. It says, if blah, then blah. It's a condition, right? It's a condition on the statement. And conditionals work like this. They have an antecedent and they have a consequent. If P, then Q, right? Back to this. If determinism is true, then you are never able to do otherwise. So in this context, right, we've got the antecedent, if determinism is true, the consequent, then you're never able to do otherwise. And in order to make this conditional false, that is, we're trying to make the conditional false because we want to say like, oh, we're going to reject this argument and I can have both free actions and determinism's true. So I can hold on to premise one, but I can reject the conclusion and say, nope, some of my actions are still free. What we got to do is deny the connection between the antecedent, the first part of this premise, and the second part, the consequent. And how are we going to do that? Well, we have to make the conditional false. How do you make a conditional statement false? Well, in order to do it, you have to deny there's a connection between the first part and the second part. And in order to deny that connection, what you need to do is show that it's possible for the first part to happen, but the second part to not happen. Think about it this way. If in this case we're trying to break the connection between determinism being true and you never being able to do otherwise, well, then what we need to come up with is a case in which determinism is true and you are able to do otherwise. That is, the first part is true, the determinism is true, and it's false that you're never able to do otherwise. So you are able to do otherwise. That's what we're looking for. We want to come up with a case that makes the conditional false, where the antecedent is true, the if P part's true, and the then Q part's false. So here's an example. Here's a true conditional. If Felix is a cat, then Felix is a mammal, right? The basic idea here being that, we've got this little Venn diagram. There's the mammals, all of them, and there's the cats, all of them. And as it turns out, all of the cats is within all of the mammals. And if we put Felix in there, right, if Felix is a cat, then Felix is a mammal. In this case, Felix is a cat, so Felix is a mammal. Now, that's a true example, but what about a false example? So here's a false conditional, and here's, the sort of obvious example. If Felix is a mammal, then Felix is a cat, right? That is a false conditional. And how are we going to show that that conditional sentence is false? Well, remember, we want to show that it's possible for the first part of the sentence, the antecedent, to be true, and the second part of the sentence to be false. We want to show that the antecedent is true and that the consequent is false in order to show that the connection between the two that is supposedly being stated by the sentence, it doesn't actually hold. We're breaking the connection here. So here's how you do it, right? If this sentence, if Felix is a mammal, then Felix is a cat, is false. Just in case, Felix is a mammal, but Felix isn't a cat. Suppose Felix is a dog. Well, then Felix is going to be among the mammals, but Felix isn't going to be among the cats. So in this case, we've got a counterexample to the conditional statement. It's an example in which the first part is satisfied, Felix is a mammal, and the second part isn't satisfied, Felix is not a cat. So counterexample. Now, compatibilism, here the idea is we've got the same idea. Here, the view, we're rejecting this premise too, is that determinism doesn't preclude you from being able to do otherwise. Just because what you do is determined doesn't mean that you didn't have options to do other than what you did, right? So, think about what you had for breakfast yesterday. You had options, right? Suppose you had a bowl of cereal. You could have gone out and gotten some Starbucks. You could have, used DoorDash to get something. You could have just had a cup of coffee. You didn't have to have the cereal that you had. You had all these other options. And having those other options is all it means that you could have done otherwise. Just because, the laws of nature determined everything to happen in the way that it does, doesn't preclude you from being able to do otherwise. So the basic idea behind compatibilism here is actually that determinism and freedom of the will are compatible. It's possible for both determinism to be true and for you to be free, because the idea is that freedom is just this. In order to act, one must determine one's actions. So one has the freedom to decide what one's going to do. That is, even if one's decisions are based on predetermined desires and dispositions. And in deciding, you must choose between options. And that's just what it is to be free. If that's just what it is to be free, and you have the ability to choose between options, even if determinism is true, it seems like you still are choosing what it is that you're doing. That's just how, living your life works. And so compatibilism is an option. It could be the case that determinism is true, but you do have the ability to choose other than to have chosen otherwise than what you did. Problem for compatibilism. And we'll talk more about this in the next lecture. The consequence argument. The consequence argument is a beast. It seems like there are two different views, basically. Some people are compatibilists, and they think that free will is compatible with determinism. Other people are incompatibilists, and they think no, free will and determinism are at odds with one another, and it's not possible that the two things could be true at the same time. So they think, back to the original argument, they think, maybe they buy whether or not determinism is true, but they think that premise two here, if determinism is true, then you're never able to do otherwise. They think that that's airtight premise. And they tend to rely against compatibilism on the consequence argument. I'll just go through this quickly, and then we'll talk more about it next lecture. The consequence argument says this: if determinism is true, then what you do is always a consequence of the laws of nature and the distant past. That is, if determinism is true, the laws of nature are strict and have set everything up in such a way that given the distant past, the Big Bang and all of the stuff that happened since then, it's really long and complicated history, but all that stuff has culminated in today with whatever it is that you're doing, right? Whatever it is that you're doing is just a consequence of how all that stuff happened. Premise two, you have no control over the laws of nature or the distant past, right? You do not have the ability to go reach back into the past. You don't have a time machine. You can't change how things were. And the laws of nature are way beyond our control. Maybe God, if God exists, he can control them. But, that's wild. The laws of nature are completely outside of our control. If we had the ability to control them, then, they wouldn't be the laws of nature. They'd be shifty. Premise three, if determinism is true, then what you do is always a consequence of things over which you have no control. So that comes from premise one and premise two. There, determinism is true, then what you do in the past is always a consequence of the laws of nature and distant past, and you have no control over the laws of nature and distant past. So if determinism is true, then you're always doing things that are a consequence of things that you have no control over. So premise four, if what you do is always a consequence of things over which you have no control, then you're never able to do otherwise, right? If you can't do anything over, if everything that you end up doing is something that you don't have control over, then you couldn't have done otherwise. So finally, back to premise two of the original argument, DT2 here, the conclusion now of the consequence argument states, if determinism is true, then you are never able to do otherwise. Looks like an airtight argument to me. It's pretty difficult to get out of this argument as a compatibilist. And it seems like, if you really thought that determinism and free will were, compatible with one another, something's gone wrong because this argument seems really, really strong. Is there any other option that you could have, right? I mean, like with this argument, we looked at, premise one, and, it seemed like, oh, well, we can't go in for a random universe because then that's problematic. Premise two, well, maybe premise three, but premise three looks pretty solid too, right? I mean, if you're never able to do otherwise, then your actions aren't free. That just seems pretty plausible. But what about premise? Maybe we didn't think hard enough about premise one. Can't we just deny that determinism is true in another way and not go in for complete randomness? I mean, it doesn't seem like just saying, oh, determinism isn't true implies that everything's totally random, right? And that's what the third option really is. And that's what the kind of view that lots of people hold today is called. They deny that determinism is true, and they accept what's called libertarian free will. Libertarian free will denies determinism, but doesn't accept full randomness of the universe. Instead, libertarians think that agents are in the world and they are able to change it. That is, agent causation is something that is possible. Agents are free and can act free regardless of the previous states of the world and the laws of nature. That is, that somehow there is some other activity in the universe. The universe, in some sense, there's another way of putting this, is not closed, is not causally closed. It's not the case that the Big Bang was the beginning of causing everything, and everything else is just going to keep going from there, and nothing else new is going to happen. No, on this view, on the libertarian free will view, there are agents like us, or maybe God, in the universe that can change how things are. And we can go, we can't go against the laws of nature, but we can augment how things are in the past. And we are not under control, at least complete control, of the laws of nature and the states of the past. Now, one of the problems with the libertarian free will view, and maybe we'll talk more about that this next time, is that nobody has any idea what a libertarian free will is, or how they come into existence, or anything of the sort. I mean, some people postulate that God must have, be placing them around. But if you're into like a more scientific way of thinking about things, or you're not like sold that God exists, then maybe you try and come up with another theory of how we came to have free wills, if evolution is true or something like that. And it's very unclear how free wills could possibly come into being over time, given that before human beings or even living creatures existed, all there was the loss of nature, and the dispositions, the states of the past, the states of the how things work. So libertarian free will is an interesting view, but it's really hard to see how it's true, even though it's the only other option besides decide. I mean, the three options are accept that determinism is true, and accept that we have no free will, which that seems pretty crazy. It seems pretty obvious to me, like I have free will. The other option is to be a determinant, to be a compatibilist, and accept that determinism is true, but say, hey, you know what? Determinism and free will, those things go together. But then in order to do that, you have to figure out a way around the consequence argument. And that's a really difficult argument to figure out a way around. Finally, the other option is to accept libertarian free will and accept that there's some really mysterious stuff going on in the world. Determinism is false, even though it seems like it's true. We have free will, which is how things seem. But then, yeah, determinism and free will are incompatible, and we have little to no clue how exactly it is that free will happens or works. All right. Finally, for this lecture, there's something I do want to talk about. It's an interesting little paradox that we've got here, and it's the question of whether or not we should be believing that we have free will or not. And this is basically a paradox of free will, the free will paradox. So think about it this way. Do you believe that you have free will? I mean, it hopefully seems to you like you do. I mean, like, just look at your hand, flip your hand over, raise your arm, kick your feet a little bit, like wiggle your toes. It seems like you're choosing to do these things. It seems like you're free to do these things. You could just, how about like, okay, think about raising your arm and then don't do it, right? Oh, you just like totally did something free, right? You were thinking about raising your arm and then you didn't do it. Wow. So now, if you believe that you're free and there is no free will, right? It turns out that, just as a matter of fact, there is no free will and you believe that you are free. Well, then it turns out that you're determined to believe that you are free. So if you're determined to believe that you're free, then like you can't even really change your mind in a sense freely, because if you did, that would have been determined as well, right? And so it wouldn't really be changing your mind. Like you wouldn't really be freely changing your own mind. You would just be, it'd just be determined that you believed one thing at one point in time and then you believe another thing at another point in time. You didn't change your mind. You didn't do anything. So if you believe that you're free, and it's not the case that you believe that you're free, then it doesn't really matter, because like it's determined that you did so, right? If it turns out you're not free and you don't believe that you're free, then similarly it was determined that that you did so. But what I want to point out is the sort of next part of this. If it's determined that you're not free, if determinism is true and you believe that you're not free, you're going to get stuck in a really weird position. So suppose that you don't have believe that you have free will. Suppose that you think, actually, you know what? Everything that I do is determined. So now question, did you choose freely on the basis of an argument or some evidence to believe that you lack free will, right? Like take the determinism argument from earlier. Suppose you're like, yep, I buy it. It's a good argument. I don't want to be, libertarian free will person. I also don't want to be a compatibilist. I'm just going to be a determinist, and I'm going to say, yep, I don't have any free will. Well, question, did you choose to believe that on the basis of the argument? Well, if you freely chose to believe that, I mean, are you choosing now to continue believing that you lack free will? Well, how are you doing that? Aren't you doing it freely? What's going on here? How are you freely choosing to believe that you don't have free will? This is like the Descartes cogito, right? Remember back when it's like he realized that he can't doubt that he's doubting. He can't doubt that he, is thinking, because in order to, if he was doing that, he'd have to exist. Similarly, you can't freely choose to believe that you don't have free will. That's just a contradiction in some weird way, right? So in the end, it's this weird paradox that in order to sort of live in this world, you have to believe that you're free. You have to believe that you can do things, that you can have choices, and that you can make choices. You can't just believe that everything is predetermined and then like sit back and watch. Like imagine you go to dinner at a restaurant, and when you're asked for your order, you don't respond. You just sort of stare up at the waitress. And after a few moments, you say to the waitress, "Oh, don't worry. I don't have free will. So, whatever I order is predetermined." Like the waitress is going to stare at you and be like, "What?" Some yeah, some people have called this the incredulous stare. You're going to get somebody looking at you like, "What? Are you some weird philosopher?" You can't do that, right? I mean, just because it's predetermined doesn't mean you can't now do choosing. You can't not choose in some weird way. So whatever it means to be free in the end, whatever it is to have free will, whether or not we have it or not, we all experience choice, and we cannot help but continue to choose to live our lives in such a way that we choose to do things, right? We choose to do things among the options that we have before us. We deliberate about the options, and then we choose, right? You can have the pizza, or you can have the burger, or you can have the salad, but you can't sit there and not choose and then still get a meal, right? To fail to choose in this way is to fail to act, right? And if you fail to act because you think you can't choose, it's in some way to fail to live a human life, right? Um, it's like to become a vegetable or become a tree, right? Like if you're not choosing, I don't think plants have the ability to choose. They don't have the ability to choose, and that's part of why we don't think that they have free will in any interesting sense, right? But human beings do have the ability to choose, and we do, it seems like, have wills. At least it seems to me like I have freedom to choose what I want to do. And on the basis of that, it seems like living part of my life is involved in choosing to do things. And if you fail to choose and thereby fail to act, then I don't know what you're doing. You're not being a human. All right. Next lecture will be continuing. We'll talk more about compatibilism and the consequence argument, and I think a little bit more about whether or not libertarian free will is actually plausible or totally implausible.